Ethan Miller's first date was going surprisingly well. The laughing came easily. The talking never felt forced, and for the first time in years, this single father felt like he didn't need to protect himself. Then, just before dessert came, the woman sitting across from him looked down, held her napkin tightly, and whispered something sadly familiar. "You can leave. I'm a single mom." The room seemed to get quiet. Ethan knew that the next moment would decide if this was just a nice evening or the beginning of something real, a family. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan Miller had no plans to meet anyone. He was standing in line at a coffee shop 2 blocks from his office, thinking about the computer system he'd need to explain to his boss that afternoon. The delivery company he worked for had old computers that kept breaking, and nobody wanted to hear about how much it would cost to fix them. He was 35 years old, tired in a way that didn't show on his face, and he'd learned to keep his personal life private from everything else. The woman in front of him was looking through her bag really carefully, like she'd lost something important. Her wallet, probably, or her keys. Ethan waited, checking his phone, not really paying attention until she turned around with a sorry smile. She was about his age, maybe a little younger, with dark hair pulled back and a work name tag clipped to her shirt that said Riverside Clinic. She looked at him like she was going to ask for help, but wasn't sure if she should. "I'm short $3, Adele Parker said, holding up a handful of coins. "This is embarrassing." Ethan stepped forward and handed his card to the coffee worker without thinking about it. It took 5 seconds. Adele looked surprised, then thankful, then a little uncomfortable in the way people do when they owe a stranger something small. She thanked him twice, said she'd pay him back tomorrow, and left with her coffee before he could tell her not to worry about it. He didn't expect to see her again, but she came back the next day. She found him at the same coffee shop during the same lunchtime and handed him $3 in cash along with an extra $5 for his trouble. Ethan tried to say no to the extra money, but she wouldn't take it back. They talked for a few minutes while waiting for their orders. She asked what he did for work, and he told her computer support. Nothing exciting. She said she worked at the clinic down the street handling patient check-ins and insurance paperwork. The talking was easy in a way that felt accidental. After that, they kept running into each other. Same coffee shop, same time, a few days a week. It wasn't planned, but it also wasn't completely random. Ethan started showing up at noon more often. Adele did, too. They talked about work, about the weather, about the coffee shop's terrible pastries. She had a quiet laugh that made her seem younger than she probably was. He noticed she never talked about her personal life, and he didn't share his either. It felt safer that way. Then one afternoon, after nearly 2 weeks of these small talks, Ethan decided to take a risk. They were standing outside the coffee shop about to head back to their jobs when he asked if she'd want to have dinner sometime. Not coffee, an actual dinner. Adele looked at him for a long moment, and he thought she was going to say no, but instead she said yes. She said it quietly, like she wasn't completely sure it was a good idea, but she said it. They met on a Friday evening at a small Italian restaurant neither of them had been to before. Neutral place. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early and sat at the bar, trying not to check his watch too often. He'd told his ex-wife he'd pick up their daughter late that night, which gave him a few hours. He didn't mention the date. She didn't need to know. When Adele walked in, she looked different than she did at the coffee shop. She'd let her hair down, and she was wearing a dress that showed she'd put thought into this. Ethan stood up, suddenly realizing that this was real. This was a date. The hostess led them to a table near the window. They ordered wine, then food, and the talking picked up where it always did, easy and slow. Adele asked about his work, and he told her about the computer crashes and the rules that made everything harder than it needed to be. She told him about the clinic, about how insurance companies made her job impossible, about the patient who couldn't pay for their medicines but kept showing up anyway. They talked about movies they hadn't seen, books they meant to read, places they'd never traveled to. It was a kind of talking that felt like it could go on forever. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. There was no acting here, no trying to impress or avoid things. Adele wasn't trying to be someone she wasn't, and neither was he. They laughed at the same things. They ordered dessert even though they were both full. The restaurant was warm, the lighting soft, and for the first time since his divorce, Ethan thought maybe he was ready for this. Maybe this was what he'd been waiting for. Then, halfway through dessert, something changed. Adele put down her fork and looked at her hands. She wasn't smiling anymore. Ethan noticed a change right away. The way her shoulders got tight, the way her fingers squeezed a napkin in her lap. She took a breath, and when she looked up at him, her face was carefully blank. "I need to tell you something," Adele said. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. something heavy. Ethan waited. He didn't say anything, didn't try to guess what was coming. He just watched her. And in that moment, he understood that whatever she was about to say would change the direction of the evening, maybe the direction of everything. Adele looked at him directly, and her next words came out soft but clear. You can leave. I'm a single mom. The words hung in the air between them. Ethan felt the weight of them, the history packed into that single sentence. She wasn't asking him to leave. She was giving him permission. She was telling him that she'd understand if he did, that she was used to it, that this was a point where most people walked away, and she wouldn't blame him if he was one of them. Ethan didn't move. He didn't reach for his wallet or check his phone or make up an excuse about needing to go. He just sat there, looking at the woman across from him. This woman who just handed him a way out, and he realized something important. This wasn't a test. This was her reality. She wasn't trying to scare him off. She was just tired of pretending. The restaurant noise continued around them. Glasses clinking, conversations overlapping, the waiter walking past with a tray of drinks. But at their table, everything had gone still. Ethan knew that what he did next mattered, not just for tonight, but for whatever might come after. He thought about his own daughter, about how many times he'd had to explain to women that he had a kid, about how quickly some of them disappeared after that. He thought about what it meant to be a parent and to try to date at the same time. He thought about how lonely that could be. Then he leaned forward slightly, his hands flat on the table, and he spoke. I'm not leaving, Ethan said. Adele blinked. She looked at him like she wasn't sure she'd heard him correctly. I'm a single dad, Ethan continued. I have a daughter. She's 7, so I get it. The surprise on Adele's face was immediate and real. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. For a moment, she just stared at him, processing what he'd just told her. Then, slowly, something softened in her face. Not relief exactly, more like recognition, like she'd just realized they were speaking the same language. Adele's surprise didn't fade quickly. She sat back in her chair, looking at Ethan like she was seeing him for the first time. The tension that had been there moments ago didn't disappear completely, but it shifted into something else, something closer to curiosity. She picked up her water glass, took a slow sip, and set it down carefully. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter than before. You didn't mention that, Adele said. Ethan shrugged slightly. He wasn't trying to hide it. He just hadn't found the right moment to bring it up. And maybe, if he was honest with himself, he'd been waiting to see if this would even go anywhere before adding that complication. But now it was out there, and he wasn't going to take it back. I guess I was waiting for the right time, Ethan said. Turns out there isn't one. Adele nodded slowly, like she understood that better than most people would. She folded her napkin and placed it on the table, her movements careful. The dessert sat between them, half-eaten and forgotten. She looked at him directly, and when she spoke, there was something raw in her voice that hadn't been there before. Most guys leave, Adele said. When they find out I have 2 kids, they don't say it because of that. They make up other reasons. They are busy. They are not ready. They just got out of something. But I know. I've seen it enough times to know. Ethan listened without interrupting. He could hear the exhaustion in her words, the kind that came from repeating the same pattern over and over and expecting a different result. She wasn't angry. She was just tired. Tired of hoping and being disappointed. Tired of pretending it didn't hurt. I stopped blaming them a long time ago, Adele continued. It's a lot. 2 kids, a full-time job, no help. I get it. Most people want something easier. She looked down at her hands, and for a moment, Ethan thought she might be done talking. But then she looked back up at him, and there was something vulnerable in her face that made him understand just how much courage it had taken for her to say what she'd said. She wasn't giving him permission to leave because she didn't care. She was giving him permission because she did care, and she didn't want to waste either of their time if this wasn't going anywhere. Ethan thought about what she'd just told him. He thought about his own daughter, about the women he'd dated who'd smile politely when he mentioned her and then never called again. He thought about the ones who'd tried to stick around but couldn't handle the reality of his life, the missed calls because his daughter was sick, the canceled plans because his ex-wife changed his schedule, the constant balancing act between being a good father and trying to have something for himself. He knew exactly what Adele was talking about, and he knew she was right. It was a lot. It required patience and flexibility, and a willingness to come second sometimes. Most people couldn't do it. But sitting there, looking at this woman who just laid everything out in front of him, Ethan realized something important. He wasn't looking for easy. He'd done easy, and it hadn't worked. What he wanted was real. And real was messy and complicated and required more than just showing up on Friday nights. I'm not leaving, Ethan said again, this time more firmly. Not because I feel sorry for you. I'm staying because this is the most honest conversation I've had in years. Adele looked at him, and something in her face shifted. Not hope exactly, more like the beginning of trust. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and Ethan didn't push. He just let the silence sit between them, comfortable and unhurried. When the waiter came by to ask if they wanted anything else, Adele shook her head, and Ethan paid the bill. They walked out together into the cool evening air and stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. I have 2 kids, Adele said, like she needed to make sure he'd heard her correctly the first time. A boy and a girl, 5 and 8. They are everything. Ethan nodded. He understood what she was really saying. She wasn't just telling him about her kids. She was telling him that they came first, that they always would, and that if he couldn't accept that, there was no point in going any further. I get it, Ethan said. My daughter is 7. She lives with her mom most of the time, but I have her every other weekend and 1 night a week. It's not perfect, but it's what we have. Adele looked at him for a long moment, then smiled slightly. It was a small smile, tentative and careful, but it was real. They exchanged phone numbers before saying goodnight. And when Ethan drove home, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, exactly, more like possibility. They started texting the next day. Small things at first, good morning messages, pictures of bad coffee, complaints about work. The talking flowed easily, the way it had at the restaurant. And within a week, they'd made plans to see each other again. This time, lunch on a Saturday, somewhere casual. No wine, no candlelight, just the 2 of them in daylight and the truth of who they were. Ethan liked that she didn't try to hide the hard parts. When he asked about her week, she told him her son had a meltdown at school and she'd had to leave work early to pick him up. When he mentioned his daughter's birthday was coming up, she asked questions and seemed really interested. They talked about their kids the way parents do, with equal parts love and exhaustion. And Ethan found himself feeling more comfortable than he had in any relationship since his divorce. But as the weeks went on, he started to notice something. Adele kept him at a distance. Not emotionally. She was open with him in their conversations, more open than he'd expected. But practically, she never invited him over. She never suggested he meet her kids. She never let him see the full reality of her life. It was like she'd drawn a line in the sand, and no matter how close they got, she wouldn't let him cross it. Ethan tried not to take it personally. He understood why she was being careful, but it bothered him more than he wanted to admit. He wanted to be part of her life, not just a person she texted when the kids were asleep. He wanted to see her house, meet her children, understand what her days actually looked like. But every time he brought it up, even gently, she changed the subject or made an excuse. One evening, after they'd been seeing each other for nearly a month, they met for coffee after work. It was the same coffee shop where they'd first met, and the familiarity of it felt comforting. But something was different. Adele seemed distracted, like her mind was somewhere else. Ethan asked if everything was okay, and she nodded, but he didn't believe her. I'm just tired, Adele said. My daughter had a rough night. She's been having nightmares. Ethan wanted to ask more, but he could tell she didn't want to talk about it. So instead, he told her about his week, about the project at work that was going sideways, about his daughter's soccer game. Adele listened, but he could feel her pulling away, retreating into the part of her life he wasn't allowed to see. After she left, Ethan sat in his car for a while, staring at the steering wheel. He thought about what he was doing, about whether this was sustainable. He liked Adele more than liked her. But he was starting to wonder if his patience would be enough, if she'd ever let him in, if this would always be a relationship that existed in the margins of her real life. He didn't want to be demanding. He didn't want to push her into something she wasn't ready for. But he also didn't want to be kept at arm's length forever. He wanted something real, something whole, and he wasn't sure she could give him that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. 2 weeks later, things came to a head. They were on the phone late at night, one of the rare times when Adele's kids were both asleep, and she had a few minutes to herself. Ethan had been thinking about what he wanted to say for days, and he finally decided to just be honest. I want to meet your kids, Ethan said. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Adele spoke, her voice careful and measured. Why? She asked. Ethan thought about how to answer that. He could say it was because he cared about her and wanted to be part of her life. He could say it was because he wanted to understand what her days looked like. But instead, he told her the truth. Because I'm not just interested in the version of you that exists when your kids are asleep, Ethan said. I want to know all of it, the messy parts, the hard parts, the parts you don't show people. Adele didn't respond right away. When she did, her voice was quiet but firm. My kids are my priority, she said. They are not something I introduce to people unless I'm sure, and I'm not sure yet. Ethan felt the weight of those words. He knew what she was really saying. She didn't trust him enough. She didn't know if he'd stick around. And she wasn't willing to risk her children's stability for someone who might disappear in a few months. I understand, Ethan said, and he meant it. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. They talked for a few more minutes, but the conversation felt strained. When they hung up, Ethan sat in the dark, wondering if this was the beginning of the end. He'd been here before, in relationships that felt promising until they hit the wall of real life. He'd walked away from those relationships without much regret. But this time was different. This time, he didn't want to walk away. He wanted to fight for it. He just didn't know how. 3 days later, Adele called him. It was late afternoon, and Ethan was at work, staring at a screen full of code that wasn't cooperating. When he saw her name on his phone, he stepped outside to take the call. I've been thinking about what you said, Adele said, skipping any greeting, about meeting my kids. Ethan waited. He didn't say anything, didn't try to influence a decision. He just let her talk. I'm scared, Adele admitted. I'm scared you'll meet them and realize this is too much. I'm scared they'll get attached and you'll leave. I'm scared of a lot of things. Ethan understood that. He was scared, too. Scared of messing this up. Scared of not being enough. Scared of getting hurt. But he also knew that fear wasn't a reason to stop trying. I can't promise I won't mess up, Ethan said. But I can promise I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. There was another long silence. Then Adele spoke, her voice steady but uncertain. Okay, she said. You can meet them. But just as a friend. Not as my boyfriend. Not as anything serious. Just a friend who's coming over for dinner. Ethan felt his chest tighten. This was it, the moment that would determine whether this relationship had a future or whether it would end before it really began. He knew that if he couldn't handle what came next, if he couldn't fit into her life the way it actually was, she'd close the door on him forever. And he wouldn't blame her. When? Ethan asked. Saturday, Adele said. 6 o'clock. I'll text you the address. When they hung up, Ethan stood outside his office building, watching the traffic go by. And he realized something. This wasn't just about meeting her kids. This was about proving that he could be the kind of person who showed up, who stayed, who didn't run when things got complicated. And he had no idea if he was ready for that. Saturday came faster than Ethan expected. He spent a morning with his own daughter, taking her to the park and then dropping her back at his ex-wife's house by noon. She asked where he was going that night, and he told her he had plans with a friend. It wasn't a lie exactly, just not the whole truth. He wasn't ready to explain Adele to his daughter yet. Not until he knew where this was going. By 5:30, Ethan was driving across town to the address Adele had texted him. The neighborhood was older, the kind with small houses built close together and streets lined with trees that had been there for decades. He found her house easily enough, a one-story place with a small front yard and a car in the driveway that looked like it had seen better days. There were toys scattered across the grass, a bike lying on its side near the front steps. It looked lived in and chaotic and nothing like the controlled version of herself that Adele had shown him over the past month. Ethan parked on the street and sat in his car for a moment, gathering himself. He thought about what he was walking into. 2 kids who didn't know him, a woman who was probably more nervous than she'd admitted, a test he couldn't afford to fail. He got out of the car, walked up to the front door, and knocked before he could talk himself out of it. Adele answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting by the door. She looked different than she did on their dates. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing jeans and a plain shirt. No makeup, no effort to impress. This was who she was at home. And Ethan appreciated that she wasn't trying to hide it. She smiled, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Come in, Adele said, stepping aside. Ethan walked into the house, and the first thing he noticed was a noise. A television was on in the living room, too loud. Somewhere in the back of the house, a child was yelling about something. There were dishes in the sink, visible from the entryway. A basket of laundry sat on the couch, half-folded. It wasn't dirty or neglected. It was just real, the kind of real that most people tried to clean up before guests arrived. But Adele hadn't, and Ethan understood why. This was the test. Could he handle this? A girl appeared in the hallway, 8 years old, with dark hair like her mother's. She looked at Ethan with open curiosity, but didn't come closer. Behind her, a younger boy peeked around the corner, 5 years old and clearly less brave than his sister. Adele put a hand on the girl's shoulder. "This is my friend Ethan," Adele said. "Ethan, this is Lily, and that's Mason." Ethan smiled and gave a small wave. He didn't try to get too close or be overly friendly. He knew kids could sense when adults were trying too hard. Lily waved back, but Mason disappeared back into the hallway. Adele sighed. "He's shy," she explained, though she didn't sound apologetic about it. "He'll warm up." Ethan followed Adele into the kitchen, which was small and crowded with the remnants of the day. There were school papers on the counter, a half-finished art project on the table, a stack of mail that hadn't been opened yet. Adele moved through it all with practiced efficiency, clearing space and starting to pull out ingredients for dinner. She'd told him she was making spaghetti, nothing fancy, and Ethan was glad for that. This wasn't about impressing him. This was about showing him the truth. Lily came into the kitchen and climbed onto one of the chairs, watching Ethan with the kind of directness that only children have. She asked him what he did for work, and he told her he fixed computers. She asked if he had any kids, and he said yes, a daughter about her age. She seemed satisfied with that and went back to watching the television in the other room. Mason stayed hidden. Ethan offered to help with dinner, and Adele handed him a cutting board and some vegetables. They worked side by side in the small kitchen, and it felt surprisingly comfortable. Adele talked while she cooked, telling him about her week, about the fight Lily had with a classmate, about Mason's doctor's appointment, about the bills she needed to pay and the car that was making a weird noise she couldn't afford to fix yet. She wasn't complaining. She was just talking the way people do when they're too tired to filter. Ethan listened and chopped vegetables and didn't try to offer solutions to problems she hadn't asked him to solve. He understood that she wasn't looking for someone to rescue her. She was looking for someone who could exist in her world without needing her to make it easier for him. Dinner was chaotic in the way that dinners with young children always are. Lily talked nonstop about school. Mason spilled his juice twice. Adele got up and down from the table a dozen times, refilling cups and wiping faces and reminding them to eat their vegetables. Ethan helped where he could, but mostly he just observed. He watched the way Adele moved through it all with a kind of exhausted grace, never losing her patience, always attentive to what her kids needed, even when she looked like she was running on empty. After dinner, while Adele got the kids ready for bed, Ethan cleaned the kitchen. He didn't ask if he should. He just did it. He washed the dishes, wiped down the counters, put away the leftovers. By the time Adele came back downstairs, the kitchen looked better than it had when he'd arrived. She stopped in the doorway, looking at the clean space, and something in her face shifted. "You didn't have to do that," Adele said. Ethan shrugged. He was drying his hands on a dish towel, and he set it down carefully before responding. "I know," he said. Adele walked into the kitchen and leaned against the counter. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than just one long day. She looked like someone who'd been carrying too much for too long, and wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going. Ethan wanted to say something, but he didn't know what. So instead, he just stood there, waiting. "This is my life," Adele said quietly. "Every day. It's messy and exhausting, and there's never enough time or money or energy, and I don't expect anyone to sign up for that." Ethan heard what she wasn't saying. She was giving him another out, another chance to walk away before this got more complicated. But he also heard something else underneath her words, a question, a hope, a small, fragile possibility that maybe this time someone would stay. "I'm not looking for perfect," Ethan said. "I'm looking for real, and this is real." Adele looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her trying to decide whether to believe him. He didn't push. He just let her look. Let her see whatever she needed to see. Then, slowly, she nodded. They sat on the couch and talked for another hour, keeping their voices low so they wouldn't wake the kids. Adele told him things she hadn't told him before, about her ex-husband, who'd left when Mason was a baby and hadn't been heard from since, about the financial stress that never went away no matter how hard she worked, about the loneliness of doing everything alone and the fear that her kids would grow up thinking this was normal. Ethan listened without judgment, and when she was done, he told her about his own struggles, about his divorce, about the guilt he felt every time he had to say goodbye to his daughter, about the fear that he wasn't enough. By the time Ethan left that night, it was late. Adele walked him to the door, and they stood there for a moment, neither of them quite ready to say goodbye. Ethan knew that something had changed between them. Not fixed exactly, but shifted, like a door that had been closed was now open, just a crack. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Ethan came over for dinner once a week, sometimes twice. He helped with homework and learned that Mason liked dinosaurs and Lily loved to draw. He fixed the leaking faucet in the bathroom and replaced the air filter in Adele's car. He didn't make a big deal out of any of it. He just did what needed doing the way you do for people you care about. Adele stopped keeping him at a distance. She called him when she needed help and let him into the parts of her life she'd been protecting. She introduced him as a boyfriend instead of her friend. She stopped waiting for him to leave. Slowly, carefully, she started to trust that he meant what he'd said, that he wasn't going anywhere. One night, about 2 months after that first dinner at her house, they were sitting on her couch after kids had gone to bed. Adele was leaning against him, her head on his shoulder, and they were watching something on television that neither of them was really paying attention to. It was quiet and comfortable and ordinary in the best possible way. "I don't know how to thank you," Adele said suddenly. Ethan looked down at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the television screen, but he could tell she wasn't seeing it. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For staying," Adele said simply. Ethan thought about all the times someone could have said those words to him and hadn't, all the relationships that had ended because his life was too complicated, his responsibilities too heavy. He thought about what it meant to be chosen, not despite the hard parts, but because of them, because the hard parts were what made it real. "You don't have to thank me," Ethan said. "This is where I want to be." Adele turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Not the careful, guarded smile she'd had when they first met, a real smile, open and unprotected. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. They both understood what this was. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and that was enough. Months later, Ethan would remember that first dinner, the way Adele had given him permission to leave before he'd even arrived. He'd remember the chaos and the noise and the realization that this was what family actually looked like. Not a picture-perfect moment, just people showing up for each other day after day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And he'd be grateful that he'd stayed, that he'd chosen the complicated, messy, beautiful reality of loving someone whose life didn't have room for anything less than the truth.